Alright everyone, now we've got head in the sand moment from Joyreid, the racist employed by MSNBC. She is a bigot. She has a visceral hate of most white people, unless they have the same exact beliefs as her. And it's like, why don't you just clone yourself if you want someone to be your doppelganger and that's all you can tolerate because of your penthouse echo chamber? Link in the description, archived of course. This is sort of the kind of statement I would expect from Joe Biden, honestly. Even more than from, like, Joyreid. Like, she says off-the-wall, like, zany shit, but typically it's a little bit more cerebral than this. Now she's claiming that nobody even used the term inflation until the Republicans made it a campaign issue. When did the Republicans begin the midterm campaign? May of last year? Inflation is part of the normal economic lexicon for virtually everyone. Inflation's low? That's a good thing. Oh, inflation's at 1.5 or something. Okay, that's great. Oh, wages paced ahead of inflation for the first time in fucking forever. That was under Trump, by the way. That's good too. Inflation is high, like it is right now. It's about, 8.3 or something like that. That's not good. It didn't require any form of branding whatsoever, any form of campaigning whatsoever for the average American to be aware of the fact that inflation was a problem. If you have inflation at the current level, especially if it paces ahead of wages, especially if the Fed fights it with measures that could drive unemployment up, who the fuck wouldn't be talking about inflation? It impacts the lower classes, the working class, the middle class. It's getting to the point where some elements of it are going to start impacting the upper middle class to a great extent. People that are making $100K a year, they can probably still afford their avocados. But overall, with costs massively higher, again, they may not have made that extra amount in actual money, they are still losing ground. At what point does someone who's making $100K a year no longer even qualify as upper middle class? We'll probably get to that point. Uncontrolled inflation for another year probably brings us to the brink of that. You'll have to make six figures just to be a middle classer. Well, that's not a good thing, to be clear. Joyreid, meanwhile, is a multimillionaire. She dwells in penthouse land and gated community land. She's so oppressed, as you can tell, by the way, and she's so in touch with the working class she claims to love so much, which is why she supports socialism, so that everyone can be equally miserable. I love the poor so much, I want to make the entire middle class basically the same as the poor. This is equity, according to Joyreid, and all leftoids. They want 90% of the population to suffer. Then you have a little bourgeois upper middle class that has a little bit more. Like they're the ones they're allowed to have home heating. They have meat once a week or something like that. And then you have like people like Joyreid who imagine themselves as the masters of the entire world. This is how socialism fundamentally works. We see it in every socialistic nation that ever comes into existence. Let's hope Brazil doesn't end up with that same problem, although they admittedly have problems anyway. By the way, I would like to touch on that briefly. Lula's coming into power. Presumptively, there's still mass protests going on there. Right at the right time to take the blame for a massive recession. He'll probably get booted back out the next time around. Just to be clear to the people in Brazil, there is one silver lining to that dark cloud. Bolsonaro would have been knocked on his ass if he had been reelected, because you're about to hit a massive recession worldwide. Inflation, high unemployment, a downturn in economic productivity. It'll probably be like the Great Recession. Could be worse. You could start using a D instead of an R in front of that. Interesting how adding the D makes things worse. Hint, hint to the United States public as they go to vote. Joyreid, though, is completely off her rocker. I've been hearing about inflation my entire life. I'm 35 years old almost now. In a couple of months, I'll be officially middle-aged. Yay. I think I look pretty good for 35. I may be a little bit biased. Trust me, I'm definitely a realist. I do own a mirror. Realize I'm not exactly Adonis, let's face it. I've been hearing about it the whole time. It's constantly mentioned. Every month the inflation numbers come out. They get reported on. Typically, they get reported on a little bit more vocally if they're bad, which means that it's been big in the news for the last year and a half, because Bidenomics is a failure. Joyreid would rather pretend that that's not the case. Well, the only reason people care about the inflation isn't because they go to the store and they see they're paying 30-40% more for certain products. It isn't the fact that they're paying so much more for gas. Biden keeps crowing about the price coming down. It's still $1 higher than when he took office. It's not that. It's not that home buyers are getting sticker shock. You know, if anyone's crazy enough to buy a home at the moment anyway. Unless you're buying well below your means and you happen to be fairly wealthy, you probably shouldn't be doing that right now. You should probably just bide your time and wait a year or something like that. Disclaimer, that's not official investment or fiscal advice, but it's what I would be practicing. If I had enough money right now to buy a home, I'd probably sit on that money and wait 6 months or maybe 12 or something. Just be a little bit more patient, and I think good things will happen. At some point, the currency has to deflate. The prices have to come down because they're so far out of lockstep with fiscal reality. But Joyreid pretends that's not the case. Joyreid pretends that the Republicans put it in your mind that there was inflation and that you wouldn't know otherwise. When you go to gas up your car, you wouldn't realize that the price was a lot higher. You wouldn't realize that the beans cost 50 cents more per can. You're clueless. You're a fucking lemming, according to Joyreid. You're a moron, so, you shouldn't have that thought in your head. The evil Republicans told you inflation was a problem. She never even heard it mentioned before. What kind of people do you hang out with that the inflation rates never mention? Oh, I think we've gotten at the crux of the problem. Joyreid hangs out with fellow rich people. They don't care about inflation. Their assets, most of their wealth is not held in a bank account or something like that. They don't have the salary side of things so much as they have physical wealth. If inflation happens and you have a home, the home price just rose. In accordance with inflation, right now it's outpacing the inflation, I think, in some markets. You have a yacht. You have several vehicles. You have your luxury car. These things, well, the car depreciates too over time, but it is still a store of wealth if it's, well maintained and stuff. Classic car, collectibles, jewelry. Joyreid probably has a bunch of diamonds and shit like that. She probably has bars of gold in her penthouse. These things tack along with the inflation rate, more or less. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It's, there's no 100% solid investment other than water resources at this point. But she can do that too. If all hell breaks loose, she has the money to go and buy her 10 acres with the crystal clear spring, and at the very least she has a source of water, and she can have a couple of serfs come along and farm crops. She'll need a lot of them because she seems to eat a great deal of food. There's definitely going to be raising chicken and cows and shit like that. I imagine she likes a good barbecue as well. But she's a crazy bigot. Again, you never heard inflation mentioned over the last, year until fairly recently. And then only from the GOP. Dude, the Dems have been talking about inflation. At first they pretended it didn't exist. Then they talked incessantly about how it was Trump's fault and Russia's fault. And now they're talking about how the Fed is fucking things up. That pivot was preemptively organized by Joe Biden last summer. To be clear, in fact, I think it was spring, when he came out and said, well, my plan on inflation, because he finally admitted that it existed at all, is to let the Fed do its job. Yeah, that's not passing the buck. And when that comes home to roost, when the unemployment rate begins inching upward, and stagflation is the term that's being used, Joyreid will probably claim that the Republicans coined that one too and that it doesn't date to the 1970s. That's about all. Peace out.